Assassination. Few words carry such a mix of dread and fascination. It is the sudden end of a life, and the sudden redirection of history. A blade drawn in the shadows, a vial of poison slipped into a goblet, a rifle fired from a hidden window. One moment a leader rules an empire, the next, silence. Across the centuries, assassination has been the weapon of the desperate, the ambitious, and the betrayed. It is older than recorded history itself. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were said to rule with divine authority, yet even they were not safe. Ramesses III, master of the New Kingdom, fell victim to a palace conspiracy hatched by his own wife and trusted servants. In Rome, daggers once flashed beneath the marble arches of the Senate, ending the life of Julius Caesar and plunging the empire into chaos. And in more recent memory, a single gunshot in Sarajevo ignited the First World War. But assassination is never just about killing a person. It is about sending a message to rivals, to subjects, to the world. It is power's shadow, always lurking, reminding rulers that crowns and offices are never truly secure. For some, assassination has been an act of liberation. For others, an act of tyranny. The assassin is condemned as a criminal in one age and celebrated as a hero in another. Why do humans so often turn to this act? Because assassination bypasses the battlefield, the courtroom, the parliament. It is the swiftest way to cut through layers of power and strike at the heart of authority itself. In every age, when persuasion fails and armies are too costly, assassination becomes the final language of the powerless and the ambitious alike. We tell ourselves that history is shaped by ideas, by armies, by great movements of people. Yet again and again, history pivots on the fate of a single individual. When Abraham Lincoln fell to an assassin's bullet in 1865, America's path to reconciliation after Civil War was shattered. When John F. Kennedy was struck down in Dallas, a generation lost its sense of innocence. When Martin Luther King Jr. was silenced, the struggle for civil rights took on a new, more dangerous urgency. The story of assassination is the story of fear and ambition, of loyalty betrayed and vengeance unleashed. It stretches from the tombs of pharaohs to the motorcades of modern presidents. And it forces us to confront a sobering truth, that sometimes the destiny of millions can hinge on the will of one assassin. This is the history of assassination, from pharaohs to presidents. Assassination is as old as civilization itself. The earliest records of organized murder come not from dark alleys, but from gilded palaces, where crowns and thrones were worth more than any human life. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was no mere king. He was considered a god on earth, the living bridge between mortals and the divine. To plot against him was not only treason, but blasphemy. Yet even gods could bleed. The most famous case is known as the Harem conspiracy. It was the 12th century BCE. Pharaoh Ramesses III had ruled for 3 decades, commanding armies, building temples, and projecting an image of unshakable power. But inside his palace, danger festered. A secondary wife, Queen T, sought to place her son on the throne. With allies among scribes, servants, and even military officers, she orchestrated a plot to kill the pharaoh. The conspiracy was bold. Messages were smuggled in wax tablets, sealed and carried by loyalists. Servants armed themselves. Priests whispered oaths in the shadows. And when the moment came, The king was attacked inside his own palace. For centuries, the details remained a mystery. But in 2012, scientists scanning the mummy of Ramesses III discovered the truth. His throat had been slashed so deeply he could not have survived. The divine ruler had fallen not to foreign armies, but to the daggers of his own household. The conspirators were tried, their crimes recorded on papyrus. Some were burned alive, others forced to take their own lives. Tie's son, the would-be king, was executed. The message was clear. Even in failure, assassination could shake the foundations of divine kingship. Egypt was not alone. Across the ancient world, assassination became the favored weapon in dynastic struggles. In Persia, royal brothers and ambitious generals poisoned cups and hired assassins to claw their way toward the throne. Greek city-states, too, knew the blade of political murder. The most famous early case is the killing of Hipparchus of Athens in 514 BCE. Two lovers, Harmodius and Aristogeiton, struck him down during a festival, an act remembered as the spark of Athenian democracy. To later generations, they were celebrated not as criminals, but as liberators, their statues raised in the heart of Athens. Here we see the paradox of assassination. A single act of murder could be condemned in one moment, then glorified in another. Pharaohs denounced assassins as traitors to the gods. Athenians hailed theirs as heroes of freedom. In both cases, the message was the same. Assassination was more than a death. It was a struggle over meaning, over legitimacy, over who truly held the right to rule. From the sands of Egypt to the marble temples of Greece, from the courts of Persia to the rising city-states of the Mediterranean, assassination became a dark ritual of politics. Every throne was a target. Every ruler slept with daggers in the shadows. And nowhere would this ritual be more refined or more catastrophic than in Rome. For there, assassination would become not just a danger, but a tradition. If Egypt revealed that even divine kings could fall, Rome showed the world how assassination could become a political tradition. Few civilizations embraced the dagger in politics as openly or as frequently as the Romans. The most famous killing of all came on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul and master of Rome, entered the Senate chamber. He had been declared dictator for life, a title that terrified the old guard of senators. To them, Caesar's power looked like the death of the Republic, and so men he called friends, Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, conspired together. As Caesar took his seat, the senators surrounded him. One grabbed his toga, another struck the first blow. Blades flashed again and again. According to legend, Caesar fought until he saw Brutus, his ally, perhaps even his son by rumor, among the attackers. Then, pulling his toga over his face, he collapsed beneath 23 wounds. The murder of Caesar was meant to restore liberty. Instead, it unleashed chaos. Civil war erupted, and within a generation, Caesar's grandnephew Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Assassination had not saved the Republic. It had buried it. And yet the precedent was set. Assassination became the recurring solution to imperial discontent. When emperors grew too cruel, too erratic, or too ambitious, they often found the steel of their own guards at their throats. Consider Caligula, whose cruelty and extravagance scandalized Rome. He demanded worship as a god, squandered the treasury, and mocked senators publicly. In 41 CE, his own Praetorian Guard, the elite troops sworn to protect him, turned their blades on him in a palace corridor. Caligula's wife and infant daughter were killed as well, his bloodline wiped out in an instant. Or Domitian, a ruler obsessed with plots, who trusted no one, and executed senators on whispers of suspicion. His own servants and household officials cornered him in his chambers. One drew a dagger hidden beneath his tunic and struck the emperor down. The Senate, relieved, proclaimed a new ruler within hours. Even emperors celebrated for their power were not safe. Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, fancied himself a gladiator, striding into the arena to fight before the crowds. His behavior disgusted Rome's elite. In 192 CE, his wrestling partner strangled him in his bath, at the order of his mistress and advisers. Rome hailed his death as liberation. The cycle was brutal. Emperors seized power through violence, ruled by fear, and often died by the same hand. Between Augustus and the fall of the empire, more than 24 Roman emperors were assassinated, some stabbed, some poisoned, others strangled. Assassination became not the exception, but the expectation. And yet, like the Athenians before them, Romans wrestled with meaning. Was Caesar's death a noble defense of freedom, or treachery that destroyed the Republic? Was killing Caligula an act of justice, or merely ambition by other men hungry for power? In Rome, assassination was not simply murder. It was politics itself. Rome taught the world a grim lesson, that when the sword becomes the path to power, no ruler can ever truly sleep in peace. When Rome fell, Europe fractured into a patchwork of kingdoms, dukedoms, and feuding noble houses. But even as crowns shifted and empires collapsed, one constant remained: the dagger of the assassin. In the medieval world, assassination was often cloaked in holy war, dynastic feuds, and struggles between church and crown. One of the most infamous cases was the murder of Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. Once a close ally of King Henry II of England, Becket defied the king's attempts to control the church. Enraged, Henry reportedly shouted, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights took him literally. They rode to Canterbury Cathedral in 1170 and struck Becket down at the altar, their swords flashing in the house of God. His death shocked Christendom, turning Becket into a martyr and forcing Henry to perform public penance. Assassination had backfired, forging a saint from a rival. But rulers, too, were frequent targets. Kings of Scotland, Denmark, and Norway all fell to plots within their own courts. In Byzantium, poison was a constant companion, slipped into goblets and ointments, while ambitious generals strangled emperors in their sleep. Power was fleeting, and survival often depended less on armies than on trusted bodyguards. Beyond Europe, assassination took on even deadlier forms. In the Islamic world, the rise of the assassins of Alamut struck terror into rulers from Persia to the Levant. This secretive sect, emerging in the 11th century, believed political murder was a divine tool. Their followers, known as Fidas, trained for years before infiltrating palaces and fortresses. They struck swiftly, often in public, killing viziers, sultans, and crusader lords alike. Then, they accepted death without resistance. To their enemies, they were ghosts, impossible to predict, impossible to stop. During the Crusades, European knights feared the assassins so deeply that tales of their methods spread across the continent. They became legends, whispered about in castles and camps, inspiring both dread and fascination. The very word assassin entered Western languages from their name. Meanwhile, within Christendom itself, thrones were never secure. In Scotland, King James I was stabbed to death in 1437 after a failed attempt to block his assassins in a sewer tunnel. In Hungary, King Andrew was strangled by nobles who opposed his Italian-born queen. Even the papacy was not immune. Pope John VIII was poisoned by his own clerics in the 9th century. The medieval world blurred the line between politics and murder, between divine right and human ambition. What united these killings was not only bloodshed, but symbolism. To kill a king or priest was to challenge the order of the world itself. And whether seen as crime or justice, each assassination carried echoes of the same message. No man was untouchable. The medieval centuries left behind a chilling legacy. Kings fell in their halls, bishops at their altars, and crusader lords on the battlefield. Proof that even beneath the banners of faith, power remained vulnerable to the blade. And in the Renaissance, as Europe awoke to new wealth and new ideas, assassination would not fade. It would grow sharper, more calculated and more ambitious, reaching into the heart of republics and dynasties alike. The Renaissance is often remembered as an age of beauty, learning, and discovery. But behind the paintings of Michelangelo and the verses of Shakespeare lay a world just as steeped in betrayal and blood as the Middle Ages. Assassination in this era was not only common, it was central to politics. In Florence, the Medici family rose from bankers to rulers, transforming their city into the cradle of the Renaissance. Yet with power came rivals. In 1478, during Easter Mass in the city's great cathedral, enemies of the Medici launched the Pazzi conspiracy. As the choir sang, assassins struck at Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano. Giuliano was stabbed to death on the cathedral floor, his body pierced by 19 wounds. Lorenzo, slashed across the neck, barely escaped alive. But survival was not enough. Lorenzo turned the failed plot into a weapon. The conspirators were hunted down, many hanged from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. Florence had witnessed not just murder, but sacrilege, with politics played out in blood on holy ground. From that day forward, the Medici ruled with even greater authority. Their enemies crushed, their legend secured. England, too, lived in the shadow of assassins. Queen Elizabeth I faced wave after wave of Catholic plots, many backed by foreign powers. Conspirators sought to replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, who became the focus of endless intrigue. In 1586, the Babington plot was uncovered, a plan to murder Elizabeth and spark Catholic rebellion. The scheme collapsed, and Mary herself was executed. Assassination had failed. But paranoia now defined Elizabeth's reign. And yet, perhaps the boldest attempt of the age came in 1605, the Gunpowder Plot. A group of Catholic conspirators, led by Robert Catesby, planned to blow up the English Parliament on its opening day, killing King James I and the entire political establishment in one fiery blast. 36 barrels of gunpowder were hidden beneath the chamber. But on the eve of the attack, a letter betrayed the plan. Soldiers discovered Guy Fawkes guarding the explosives. Tortured, he revealed the conspiracy. The failure had consequences far beyond one night. Harsh new laws cracked down on Catholics across England, and the discovery of the plot became a symbol of national survival. November 5th was fixed in memory with bonfires, fireworks, and the chant, "Remember, remember, the 5th of November." Across Europe, assassination thrived in an atmosphere of religious strife, courtly intrigue, and rising nationalism. Kings, queens, and popes lived in constant fear of poison, dagger, or hidden musket. Power was beautiful, but deadly. And as the Renaissance gave way to the age of revolutions and empires, assassination would follow, shaping the destinies of nations on a far larger scale. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the world was in upheaval. Revolutions toppled monarchs, empires expanded, and new nations were born. Yet amid the thunder of cannon fire and the roar of crowds, assassination remained a quiet but decisive force. In revolutionary France, kings and queens faced not daggers in the dark, but blades in broad daylight. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed publicly, their deaths staged as political theatre. The guillotine may not have been assassination in the traditional sense, but the revolution also bred conspiracies. Napoleon Bonaparte, rising from soldier to emperor, survived numerous attempts on his life. In 1800, royalist extremists planted a barrel of gunpowder along his route through Paris, the so-called infernal machine. The blast killed horses and bystanders, but Napoleon emerged unscathed. Other attempts followed. Daggers hidden in crowds, poison whispered into goblets. Yet again and again, he escaped. To his followers, it seemed fate itself protected him. To his enemies, it was maddening proof of his iron grip on power. In Russia, however, assassins eventually prevailed. Tsars ruled with absolute power, yet they could never escape the reach of revolutionaries. Alexander II, remembered as the Tsar liberator for freeing the serfs, was struck down in 1881. As his carriage rolled through the streets of St. Petersburg, assassins from the group People's Will hurled bombs. The first damaged his guards. The second tore through the emperor himself. His legs shattered, his body bleeding. Alexander died within hours. His death halted reform in Russia and hardened the autocracy, setting the stage for revolution. The cycle continued. Alexander III survived attempts, only for Nicholas II to eventually fall not by assassination, but by firing squad during the Bolshevik Revolution. In Russia, assassination had become almost expected, the price of ruling a restless empire. Across the Atlantic, the United States faced its own shattering moment. On April 14, 1865, just days after the Civil War ended, President Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater. As the audience laughed, actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth slipped into the president's box. With a single shot to the head, he ended Lincoln's life. The nation reeled. Booth fled, but was cornered and killed within days, while his fellow conspirators were captured and executed. Yet the deeper wound was political. Many believed Lincoln's vision for reconciliation had died with him. Instead, Reconstruction descended into division and bitterness, leaving scars that endured for generations. Assassination in the age of revolutions and empires carried a new weight. No longer confined to palace intrigues, it struck at figures who embodied entire nations. Kings, emperors, and presidents became targets, their deaths shaping the destinies of millions. And in 1914, a single assassination would not just change a nation, it would ignite a war that engulfed the world. By the early 20th century, Europe was a powder keg. Old empires clashed with rising nations, and nationalist movements burned fiercely in the Balkans. It would take just one spark to set the continent ablaze. And that spark came from an assassin's pistol. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, rode in an open car through the streets of Sarajevo. The city seethed with tension. Serbian nationalists, resentful of Austrian control, plotted to strike. Among them was a frail 19-year-old student, Gavrilo Princip. That morning, a first attempt failed. A bomb thrown at the Archduke's motorcade bounced off his car and exploded beneath the one behind him, wounding officers and bystanders. The assassin swallowed a cyanide pill, but it failed, and he was arrested. It seemed the plot had collapsed. But fate had other plans. Later that day, Franz Ferdinand insisted on visiting the wounded in the hospital. His driver, confused by last-minute changes to the route, took a wrong turn. As the car stalled in front of a cafe, Princip stepped forward. From only a few feet away, he fired 2 shots. The Archduke was struck in the neck, his wife Sophie in the abdomen. Within minutes, both were dead. The bullets of a teenager did what armies had not yet dared. They shattered the peace of Europe. Austria-Hungary demanded Serbia crush its nationalist movements. Serbia balked, alliances tightened, threats turned to mobilization, and within weeks the continent was at war. World War I consumed millions of lives, toppled empires from Russia to the Ottomans, and redrew the map of Europe. And yet it had all begun with a single act of assassination. The killing of one man and his wife on a summer morning. Princip himself lived only a short while longer. Too young for the death penalty, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Sickly and starved, he died in 1918, just before the war's end. To Serb nationalists, he was a martyr. To the world, he was the man who lit the fuse of catastrophe. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand revealed assassination's greatest power, not merely to end a life, but to unleash forces far beyond the assassin's control. No one who carried out the plot imagined it would spark a world war. Yet once begun, the chain of events could not be undone. The age of world wars had arrived, and with it, assassination would continue to shape the destiny of nations. From leaders of independence movements to presidents in motorcades. The 20th century brought revolutions, independence movements, and global superpowers. And in this turbulent world, assassination remained a weapon, sometimes for freedom, sometimes for terror, and often with consequences that reshaped entire nations. In 1948, India had just won its independence from Britain. The nation's fragile unity rested on the shoulders of Mahatma Gandhi, the frail but determined leader who had used non-violence as a political weapon. Yet his vision of harmony between Hindus and Muslims was bitterly opposed by extremists. On January 30th, as Gandhi walked to his evening prayer meeting in New Delhi, a Hindu nationalist named Nathuram Godse stepped forward, bowed, and fired 3 bullets into the leader's chest. Gandhi collapsed, whispering prayers as he died. His assassination plunged India into mourning and revealed the deep fractures that still threatened the new nation. 2 decades later, America faced its own wounds. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy rode through Dallas in an open limousine, waving to crowds. Shots rang out from the Texas school book depository. A bullet struck his neck, another his head. Kennedy slumped into the arms of his wife, Jacqueline. The young president who had promised a new frontier was gone in seconds. The accused gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, was himself shot days later on live television, leaving behind a storm of conspiracy theories that endure to this day. Kennedy's death stunned the world and marked the end of an era of post-war optimism. Just 5 years later, another dreamer fell. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., the voice of America's civil rights movement, stood on a balcony in Memphis. A rifle cracked and King collapsed, mortally wounded. His death unleashed riots across more than 100 American cities. The movement continued, but without its guiding prophet, the road grew darker, more divided, more violent. Assassination in the modern age was not confined to democracies. During the Cold War, political killings became a global chess game. In Africa, Congo's first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba, was executed in 1961 after a coup backed by foreign powers. In the Middle East, leaders and dissidents alike fell victim to bullets and bombs. From King Abdullah of Jordan in 1951, shot outside a mosque, to Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in 1981, gunned down by Islamist militants during a military parade. Even the Vatican was not immune. In 1981, Pope John Paul II was shot 4 times in St. Peter's Square by a Turkish gunman. The Pope survived, later forgiving his attacker from his hospital bed, a gesture that astonished the world. In 1981, U.S. President Ronald Reagan was shot outside a Washington hotel. He nearly bled to death, but survived after emergency surgery. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher narrowly escaped death in 1984 when the Irish Republican Army bombed her hotel in Brighton, killing 5 others. Each attack reminded the world that no leader, no matter how guarded, was beyond reach. As the century closed, assassination remained both personal and global. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was shot by a fellow Jew opposed to his peace efforts with Palestinians. In 2007, Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto was killed by gunfire and bombing during a rally, silencing the first woman to lead a Muslim-majority nation. The modern age showed assassination in all its forms. From Gandhi's prayers to Kennedy's motorcade, from King's balcony to Bhutto's rally, the 20th century proved again and again that the fate of nations could turn on the pull of a trigger. And as the 21st century dawned, the shadow of assassination had not faded. It had only adapted from daggers in palaces to drones in the sky. Across more than 3,000 years, the story of assassination has echoed through palaces, cathedrals, and city streets, from the harem plot against Pharaoh Ramesses III to the gunfire that ended John F. Kennedy's life. Each act carried the same underlying truth. Power is fragile, and those who wield it live under constant threat. Assassination has been both condemned and celebrated. To some, it is the crime of cowards, stealing life without trial or battle. To others, it is the ultimate act of justice, The blow struck when all other means have failed. Harmodius and Aristogeiton in Athens were honored as liberators. John Wilkes Booth was cursed as a traitor. The line between villain and hero shifts with time, with culture, and with the victors who write history. What makes assassination endure is not only its violence, but its symbolism. To kill a ruler is to strike at the order of society itself. The assassin's blade or bullet does not just end a life. It sends a message that no one, however divine, however powerful, is untouchable. And yet, for all its drama, assassination rarely achieves what it intends. Caesar's murder did not save the Roman Republic. It destroyed it. The killing of Franz Ferdinand did not free the Balkans. It unleashed a world war. The deaths of Gandhi, king, and rabbin did not end their causes. They transformed them into legacies. In the end, assassination is not just about who dies, but about what survives. Ideas, movements, and struggles often outlive the leaders cut down by violence. The assassin may silence a voice, but rarely do they silence the echoes it leaves behind. From pharaohs to presidents, from the Senate of Rome to the streets of Dallas, assassination has been a shadow companion to power. We have seen how a single act of violence can topple kings, ignite wars, and change the course of nations. And yet, again and again, how the ideas of the fallen outlive the assassin's hand. Assassination reminds us that history is fragile, often turning not on battles of thousands, but on the actions of one determined individual. It is a story of betrayal and ambition, of fear and hope, a story as old as civilization, and one that has never truly ended. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of assassination, from pharaohs to presidents. If you enjoyed this exploration of power and betrayal, consider subscribing for more stories where shadows shape history.